Hello and welcome to JPod. This is a podcast on journalists and journalism. My name is Krishna Prasad and it's great to see you here. Northern India's best known English newspapers, the Times of India and the Hindustan Times and the Indian Express, all have Hindi titles in their armory. Times has Navarat Times, HT has Hindustan, Express has Jansatta. There have also been very fine Hindi literary and features magazines like Dharm Yug and Dinaman. But at the hands of myopic owners and mercenary managers chasing consumers with spending power in the cities, the big groups have ceded space and abdicated the responsibility in the Hindi heartland. This has allowed homegrown interlopers to put a foot in the door. Growing literacy, cheaper printing technology, and a throbbing political atmosphere has helped rack up humongous circulations. While there is much to appreciate in the manner in which Dainik Bhaskar and Dainik Jagran and Amar Ujala and all the rest have grown, the same really can't be said of their business, editorial or ethical standards. Hindi newspapers and magazines, which used to boast of writers and poets and thinkers and intellectuals like Prasar Bharati and Agneya and Prabhas Joshi, has suffered from a major leadership vacuum. One of the few Hindi editors to bring spunk and substance to the editor's chair is my guest today for this episode of JPod, Mrinal Pande. Mrinal ji was the first woman to be the editor-in-chief of Hindustan, anchored Hindi news for Doordarshan and Star News. She's written short stories and novels and books and columns. She's helped set up the Indian Women's Press Corps, and she's served as chairperson of the Prasar Bharati Corporation. But whichever role she's played, Mrinal Pande has brought dignity and gravitas, attributes which are in very short supply in Indian language journalism. In JPod today, she discusses the role of Hindi journalism, both print and electronic, in mainstreaming communalism, the quality of Hindi owners and journalists and readers, and what Hindi journalists really need to do to pivot to the digital era in the post-coronavirus season. Mrinal ji, good morning and great to talk to you. I'm sure in your long and illustrious career as the editor of Hindustan, the editor of Vama, with your experience of television with Star News and as the head of Prasar Bharati, have you ever seen anything like this for the media?
Morning, Krishna Prasad. Good to see you. No, not even in my long years. Ever seen something like this? I had been predicting something like this, not under these circumstances, of course, but I had been predicting a big atrophying for the print media the way it was going.
I see. What specifically was in your mind when you predicted that?
See, since the early century, to the early 20th, 21st century, I noticed that the digital media was making its presence known. And as you, at least for Hindi, हमारे यहाँ वाचिक परंपरा, the audio works better with the vast number of readers.
Of course.
And audio also has the ability to cut across semi-literacy faster than good Hindi. तो मुझको ये लगता था कि if a day comes when technology becomes cheap and mobiles become connected with net easily enough and in a cheap avatar, and with China working the way it was, I felt that China would sooner or later unload the kind of mobiles which would connect the rural audiences with the news industry. And that would be the unraveling of the print media as we know it.
Yes.
Because print is an expensive media. You import print, pay a lot of taxes, maintain huge armies of managers and the desk. Then you also have problems circulating physically. In Bihar, I remember in the late 90s, when there were floods, we used to send our papers by boats. We used to also provide torchlights and raincoats to our dealers and vendors. And then there were huge cuts being paid to the dealers, the big dealers, at least in the Hindi media, cuts and various gifts were paid to them to keep them motivated to pick up as many newspaper and as many new people as possible. So digital cut through all that. It
Yes.
made it possible to have smaller armies. It made it possible to have smaller number of people accessing the market and the people. And so I felt if a day comes when cheap technology makes digitization an accessible commodity for Hindi average Hindi reader,
Yes.
then and then of course there was that terrible model that was unleashed by one of the biggest market leaders, in which the we created free news junkies by reducing our cover price and by cross subsidizing the reader
Yes.
through advertising. That made us dependent on advertisers, and in case of Hindi, that made us hugely dependent on government sponsored
Yes.
DABP advertising,
Right.
which I didn't like. हमारे यहाँ
Yes.
कहावत है, घोड़ा घास से दोस्ती कर लेगा तो खाएगा क्या. So begging for DAVP was like making friends with the grass.
Absolutely.
So all these things I somehow didn't like. By the time I retired, I was quite convinced that in another decade, the print media would undergo a big and very quick atrophying process, which would be faster in English because it has a smaller consumer base, and but it's happening just as fast in Hindi, and I suspect other vernaculars as well.
Do you think coronavirus has expedited that end, that
Yes,
atrophy?
yes. It was atrophying as it is, but what Corona did was it, with one fell swoop, it made dealing and vending newspapers near impossible. And people then were also paranoid about picking up papers. Every major Hindi daily today, and also many English dailies, are regularly printing a small news item in their pages to say that corona does not spread through newsprint.
Right.
But once people are so paranoid, then they will not touch a newspaper. I mean, there are people who pick it up with tongs, I'm told, and then iron it and then start reading the newspaper. But I think also we have now a very different kind of news audience. In the last 2 months, everybody has been hooked to their television and their mobile screens.
Yes.
And in 2016, the cheap 3G mobiles that Jio launched in the market,
Yes.
with that the Chinese brought in, and then Jio launched its scheme by which they got 2 months of free connectivity. That
Yes.
has exponentially widened the market for digital.
Yes.
In
Yes.
newspaper offices up to 2010, if you transferred people from the print desk to the digital desk, it was taken as a kind of a demotion. People would come to you with tears in their eyes and say कि मैम हमने क्या ऐसा किया कि आपने हमको वहाँ गधा प्लेटफॉर्म पर ले जाके खड़ा कर दिया.
Yes.
So now it's the other way.
Yes.
In those days, the paper, started assembling around 5 in the evening, and then the digital guys waited till the whole paper was ready, and then they just put it online with a few commas and things corrected.
Right.
Sometimes not even that.
Right.
Today it's the other way around, because on the digital platforms of the big newspapers, news runs 24/7. When they start assembling the paper at 5 o'clock, they call for the digital guys, यार आज की क्या क्या खबरें हैं. And then digital वाले अपनी मूंछ पर ताव देते हुए कहते हैं अब आया ऊँट पहाड़ के नीचे, and then very condescendingly they share something with them.
Yes.
Then again at 8 o'clock, when the paper is ready, then they share some news with the digital, which by then has run with the news and is chasing something else.
Yes.
So the cycles have reversed themselves. Digital is already dominating.
Yes.
The Malik has also recognized the Lalaji, the archetypal Lalaji who heads Hindi business. The shown public face is very suave, sophisticated, Sudh Bhutwala Malik, but behind them is a tried and tested Gumashta Munim. Still, abuses and bad mouths 4-letter words with every sentence he speaks.
Right.
And he's the one who checks out इसमें क्या मिलेगा, कितना मिलेगा, किस पेज में कितना ऐड जाएगा, कैसा ऐड जाएगा.
Right.
So, this kind of a fractured situation, there is a schizophrenia at the heart of the team building in Hindi papers. That schizophrenia is now becoming more pronounced because instead of multiple personality disorder, now there is a bipolar disorder.
Right.
You are either print or you are digital.
Right.
If you are not good at digital, what good are you as an editor or even as a newspaper person?
Right.
So Hindi is undergoing this terrible tussle, and there are very smart, very aggressive young people coming up in the digital media in Hindi who would waste no time in asking the ethical questions like who's it for, has it been double checked, and why are we lifting it from them. And then there are so many news apps. There is Daily Hunt, and then there is a Chinese news dog, and so as one of the editors used to say, lift irrigation chal raha hai aajkal.
Ah,
So that is the situation, and I think Corona, by locking people up, has also made them simplistic in their thinking because the sources of news are limited and they are also becoming more and more docile, and then they're becoming more and more, they're capitulating more and more to the diktats of the state because the state says कि अगर तुम ऐसे हो तो तुम सुरक्षित हो,
correct.
अगर तुमने ज्यादा बड़बड़ की तो फिर कोरोना से मरोगे और फिर
Correct.
तुमको उठाने के लिए भी कोई आदमी नहीं आएगा.
Right.
So when that happens, particularly in the Hindi belt, which has endemic poverty, which has a huge numbers of people, and now all these migrants going back, carrying terrible news about what damage Corona is doing, and the joblessness, So I suspect that the ethical questions will now be thrown out of the window.
Right.
We will bring out a bunch of heartless nerds who will
Yes.
just give you news, and nobody will ask if it comes laced with fake news put in by embedded journalists. Who are the journalists putting it out? Everything sab golmaal hai bhai, golmaal hai.
That's right. No, that's very well said. I think that's very well said because this is exactly the question that was in my mind, which is although I can understand that cheap phones and cheap data has put the mobile phone in the pockets of millions of people in the Hindi heartland, the question I was coming to was what are the kind of filters? What is the kind of journalism they're consuming? It's one thing, of course,
See,
that
if you come from a very poor part of the country, even if you have done well, till the second generation in your family, you were not doing too well. You didn't, your mother was still cooking, and you still had old-fashioned homes, and you still lived in large families, and you were still pressurized into, matches, marrying girls chosen by your family. So Hindi media and its readership actually has a slightly different psychosocial profile, like most of vernacular speaking India.
Mhm.
And for them, we have an Urdu word called kifayat shari, saving a penny is very important. So if you are getting free news,
Yes.
if you are getting news for free,
Right.
and if you are getting an additional video thrown in for good measure, you'll be very happy. In the 80s and early 90s, it used to be a done thing in Hindi. To increase your circulation, you had to, offer your dealers that with each 100 copies sold, he will be given a plastic bucket and lota and tiffin carrier or a set of steel utensils, depending on the area where he was selling. This
Yeah.
was kind of, and then I noticed this. This attitude even in the average Hindi reader, एक के
Yes.
बदले आपको दो अखबार वैसा ही मिलेगा लेकिन एक पुल आउट हम आपको और दे रहे हैं, हम आपको ये भी दे रहे हैं, हम आपको वो, and then people don't ask vital questions because in many cases they are the first or second generation readers of newspapers. The English newspaper reader is more savvy, asks more ethical questions, but let's not forget most of them are not paying for the newspapers that they are reading. They're all
Yes.
at company expense.
Yes. Yes.
Very few English newspaper readers today know what price the newspaper is that they are reading,
Correct.
or what price the Hindi papers or the vernacular spoken in their area, those newspapers are being sold at. They would be
Yes.
astounded to know that Hindi papers continued to be priced higher than the English language newspapers for a long time. They would be astounded to know that even the Raddi sold
Yes.
in the market English newspapers commanded a higher price per kilo than the
Yes.
Hindi newspapers, because Hindi newsprint used was cheaper. It was usually Rama or half indigenous and half imported. English newspapers had a superior print. So
Yes.
all those chickens are coming home to roost. The last 30 years, I've
Yeah.
been the sole person talking about all these things, and I'm taken as an eccentric in the Hindi world, and I'm taken as a kind of an uppity and bossy feminist in the generally in the work scene. But I think these are the basic questions you need to ask. What are we using? What are the actual nuts and bolts of the stuff that we are using to create news for the day? What are our checks and balances? What kind of, who's checking the ultimate product? In many Hindi newspapers today, it's not the editor who checks the ultimate product, it's the Lalaji or his nominated manager. There
Yes.
are cases I've heard, apocryphal cases, of major dailies sending their front page upstairs to the managerial floor to be cleared before it goes to press.
Yes.
Now, with this kind of a thing, you deserve to die. I think,
Yes.
in a way, Corona is probably dealing a death blow, लेकिन एक तरह से मरे को मार रहा है.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, that's well said. But broadly speaking, in the last 2 months, what has been the role of mainstream Hindi media, you think, and what's been the role of social media and electronic media? How do you, in your mind, evaluate what kind of work they have done?
Well, I find that the Hindi media has majorly swung towards the government and its policies.
Right.
If you read some of the biggest circulating Hindi dailies, most of them are, if not totally in agreement with everything the government and the leadership says, at least 75% in agreement.
Yes.
The editorials are very guarded. The subjects that they choose, the headlines that they choose are very, very guarded. And also, most of them are, kind of very jittery about the unfurling advertising. I mean, INSS today sent a letter to
Yes.
the government requesting all kinds of subsidies and, you know, tax holidays for 2 years and so on and so forth. And so things are very bad, and it impacts Hindi in a very big way because DABP advertising, if it dries up, it will impact Hindi newspapers a great deal. And today, of course, the English newspapers will also be very badly impacted. But again, the Ghoda and Ghas thing comes in. You
Hmm.
know, if you really want to bring out a good paper, whether it is digital or whether it is on print, is immaterial. There are certain basic criteria that need to be fulfilled. Are they being fulfilled? In the case of Hindi papers, I would say, except one or two exceptions, they
Hmm.
are not. What has also happened in the last 2 years is that newspapers, big newspaper chains have become monsters.
Hmm.
Just as Facebook and Google have become mega companies, they have become monsters. They've gobbled up all local small town newspapers. They're bringing out something like 50 plus editions every
Yes.
day, so that people living in Nainital, for example, will not know what is happening in Rani Khet. People living in Delhi will not know what is happening in Gurgaon, because the city pullouts are different.
Hmm.
And these editions have added to a kind of a blind spot and an inward lookingness it has created in the Hindi reader. So
Hmm.
he or she just wants to know what is in it for me. मुझे क्या additional मिल रहा है?
Yes.
And
No.
nobody asks the quality question.
Yes, very good. In the sense of what they have put out in the last couple of months, as you said, it's been quite meek and uncritical. Do you think, in that sense, the Prime Minister's interaction with media owners via video just before he announced the lockdown has paid off? Has this enabled this kind of meek response from the media?
I would doubt that very much, because let us look at the owners. The owners actually today are heading boards which have shareholders whose interests range from chemicals to fertilizers to textiles to media itself, and even financiers and various kinds of investment bankers. They're all on the boards of big newspaper chains.
Right.
So, I found them more or less like a bunch of schoolboys, all dressed in spick and span, going to meet the headmaster and very meek. I doubt if this kind of interaction will help very much, because I think they have forgotten how to ask questions. And of course, we have always been discouraged from asking questions. I've lost umpteen jobs because I asked questions, but ask questions we must. Otherwise, how do we survive as media people?
Yes.
The other thing is that there are now, what I foretell is now there are coming clashes between, in the structure of media, between the content providers, that is the publishers, and the aggregators.
Yes.
उसको देख के मजा आएगा, because aggregators क्या कर रहे हैं आजकल, फुर्सत से उठा रहे हैं और उसके बाद फिर उसको बेच रहे हैं. They had agreed initially to pay the publishers X amount of money. Usually, I believe it was something like $6,000 to $7,000 per month for the content that they lifted from their newspapers or from portals. Now they're going back on their word, and therefore some papers have already walked out of this. Yes. Now, since digital is going to grow, the tussle between the aggregators and the content providers is going to grow. Content provider कहेंगे कि भाई बेटी तो हमारी है, हम दहेज क्यों दें? They will say कि हम तुम्हारी बेटी की शादी कर रहे हैं, उसको सुरक्षा दे रहे हैं, हमको दहेज चाहिए. So this kind of a thing is going to grow, और हिंदी के लिए ये बिल्कुल नया है. Because Hindi reader doesn't care who's the aggregator. उसको तो ठीक है, उसको गया गूगल पर, उसने डेली हंट, उसके डेस्क डेली हंट पर गया या न्यूज डॉग पर गया तो उन्होंने उसमें से ले लिया. But this is going to lead to a multiple problems. Yes. And then the content apps, बासी भात में खुदा का साझा ऐसे से, content apps are coming in between. वो भी बीच बीच में अपना हिस्सा मांग रहे हैं. Right. People have stopped bothering about the emanation of news. Right. So eventually, when this particular bubble explodes, and explode it will within a year, the content remains important. So who generates the content? Where is the content being generated? Who are the people on the field? Because you need an army, you cannot generate content single-handedly. अभी तो सब झूठे पत्तल पर खा रहे हैं, लेकिन ताज़ा खाना भी तो चाहिए. कितने दिन हम माइग्रेंट लेबर की तरह से बैठ के पत्तल पर वो खाएंगे जो कि स्कूल के किचन में पकाया गया है? हमको ताज़ा खाना चाहिए, हम घर जाएंगे. Yes. Yes. So I don't know if I'm making myself.
No, I understand. I was thinking, when you were speaking, that INS in one of its early petitions actually mentioned a Chinese news aggregator as taking away much of the revenue in one of the early petitions. Then in the last couple of weeks, I saw various newspapers, especially in English, talk about demanding money from Facebook and Google for content that they had lifted.
That's right.
But suddenly, the googly that has been bold in the last 1.5 weeks is suddenly, while the media was asking for money from Facebook and Google, Facebook has gone and tied up with Geo, which puts a completely new spin on the issue now. So where will the publishers ask money from?
This is what I'm saying. The content providers, aggregators, these will be the two camps. तो कंटेंट प्रोवाइडर और एग्रीगेटर्स के बीच में अगर सांप नेवला लड़ाई होती है तो भी देखने लायक होगी, और अगर आपस में उनके समझौते हो जाते हैं तो भी देखने लायक होगी. समझौते होने लगे.
Yes.
So for a retired news person, it's an interesting phenomenon.
No, absolutely.
I'm worried. But
are the issues that English media faces vis-a-vis the aggregators the same as the issues that Hindi media faces, or is it still developing in the Hindi media?
See, in the big houses, English always leads the pack. because the managers speak English and the owners speak English. हिंदी वो न पढ़ते हैं ना उनको हिंदी में कोई रुचि है, except जब board meeting होती है then quarterly figures आते हैं, हिंदी has grown 12%, 15%, इतना हमको मुनाफा हुआ है, and everybody pats themselves on the back.
Yes.
So the big houses which are going to lead this battle are not frankly involved in the production of their Hindi news.
Right.
है ही नहीं, उनको कोई ज़रूरत नहीं है. They had been thinking in terms of cities. Now that the digital media is catering to rural audiences, which will figure 70% at least of the future consumers of news, they will have to bring in backroom boys. जैसे मुंबई में भी हुआ है ना, finally you come down to Vishal Bharadwaj and Irfan Khan types who have grown up in small towns who speak Hindi धड़ल्ले से बोलते हैं. कैटरीना कैफ या इन लोगों की तरह से अंग्रेजी में डायलॉग, रोमन अंग्रेजी में डायलॉग लिखा करके नहीं बोलते हैं. तो मीडिया will also need its indigenous, homegrown, organically grown Hindi practitioners in the media.
Yes.
And there are people, there are very good hands that I have come across, there are very bright minds I have come across. पर वही होगा कि first thing will be कि PLUs की तरफ देखो कि भाई ये हमसे अंग्रेजी में बात करेगा, हमको समझा देगा कि क्या करना है. मार्केट में भी 4 लोगों में मिलने के लिए जाएगा तो उसको एडवर्टाइजिंग आसानी से मिल जाएगी. That I think is being foolish. I think Microsoft and Google have no such inhibitions. Facebook has no such inhibitions. उनको तो अपना किल चाहिए. अगर उनको किल चाहिए तो फिर हमको भी अपना किल चाहिए. हम भी मारेंगे. तुम हमको मारोगे, हम तुमको 4 मारेंगे. तो ये अगर स्पिरिट होगी तब तो बचेंगे. और वरना ठीक है, ईस्ट इंडिया कंपनी आई रही.
Let me swing to the last couple of questions I had in mind. The role of Hindi media from about the late 1980s has been a little more clear in terms of the Hindi belt and the communalization of the Hindi belt. The manufacture of consent has been largely outsourced to the Hindi media, especially in the Hindi belt. How did you view the communalization of coronavirus, especially at the hands of Hindi media and especially at the hands of electronic media?
This had started in the 1990s. During the Babri demolition, I had, somebody had later filed a petition in the press council about a particular newspaper editor actually sitting in the police control room and monitoring the situation. So it had started in the 1990s. That is when people were embedded at the desk level. I was quite interested in watching why they were more keen on embedding people at the desk level, because that is where the paper is finally produced and that is where you can really edit. Field reporters are okay. I mean, field reporters in any case कुछ भी file कर देंगे. In any case, most Hindi papers rely 3/4 on a band of stringers whom they pay very poorly and who make their money by showing off their linkages to a big publishing house. So it is the desks in the Hindi media which have been in the forefront of communalization. They are the ones who craft the headlines, they are the ones who craft the language, they are the ones who decide which news item will be displayed how, which will be followed by which. And some of them have compromised in the sense that in the newspaper, the edit pages, sometimes they will print a kind of a liberal or left of center article just to in name कि भाई हम तो उनको भी छापते हैं, हमारा तो खुला हुआ मंच है. There are 10,000 ways of lying, but nobody is under any illusions that Hindi media has had a seminal role, and therefore, and one of the reasons which I hate to say is that Hindi media since the beginning has been underpaid, and most of the houses which have English and Hindi products have paid the Hindi media teams, including the editors, much less than the English media. The political parties understand this. So they spot early on people who can fetch and carry and who can be obliged and who can be made to do certain things for certain considerations. अंग्रेजी में भी हुआ है, ऐसा नहीं कि इंग्लिश में सब दूध के धुले हैं, वहाँ भी हुआ है. पर हिंदी में चूंकि गरीबी ज़्यादा है, people are more insecure, and like unorganized labor, they have no direct one-on-one linkage with the owners. They are brought in almost by a ठेकेदार, en masse, and put to work. If the ठेकेदार is politically motivated and has a straight hotline to the owners, then it makes it much more easier for them. And then the English paper can quietly talk about liberal values, liberal ethos, and for some time, though now not even that. But I am now appalled to see political leaders writing in edit pages of Hindi papers and also English papers. I mean, political leaders, ministers in the cabinet, who can't string two sentences together, are writing both in English and in Hindi the same day in all the eminent dailies in English and in Hindi. Not only that, also on op-ed page. Op-ed कुछ हद तक आप माफ कर सकते हैं कि चलिए op-ed is the B team. But to have editorials written by cabinet ministers, by eminent chief ministers, this is something unheard of. I never thought I'd live to see the day.
But specifically coming to coronavirus, what were the stellar moments for you in terms of communalization? Besides the Tablighi incident, was there anything else?
One thing was that it came on the heels of the Shaheen Bagh protests. So by then they had realized that it is possible for the minority community to stand together and act stubborn, and that many in the majority community are still willing to help and support them. And that helps them target and combine it with any potential that they could see in the scene. And I think there are scouts out to see any such incident which involves the minority communities and makes them vulnerable to this kind of stigmatization. So the whole corona thing was given a political spin. Nobody knows what the disease is actually like, how much toll it is going to take, the virus, what kind of virus is it. So earlier, the usual saffron groups moved in and said, go mutra karo, gobar karo, then they were silenced.
Yes.
Then the next came and then they said chloroquine is going to be helpful because see, even Trump is saying that.
Yes.
Now they have also been silenced. Now they are talking about Indian labs also furiously working, and together we will all find a way. These are all little, but when people are locked up in their house for a month and a half with their children clawing their hair out of their head, old parents making all kinds of demands, then they will say, yaar, chalo yahi theek hai.
Yes.
So yes. I think, one of the reasons why I'm hoping that we come out of this lockdown soon is for some semblance of sanity and thinking to return to people's heads. अभी तो कोई सोच ही नहीं रहा है. आज सुबह दूध आया कि नहीं आया, सब्जी वाला आएगा कि नहीं आएगा, वो फलाना हमारा यहाँ आने वाला था, डिलीवर करने वाला था, वो आया कि नहीं आया. You don't live for such things in life. There are better things to do. But unfortunately, the infantilization of the country is complete. और ऊपर से हर हफ्ते हमको प्रवचन दिए जा रहे हैं कि आप सब ने मिल करके सब ये कर दिया है, आप लोग महान हैं, हम बड़े खुश हैं, हम बड़े महान हैं. अरे औरतों को ये सेंचुरी से कहा जा रहा है कि तुम्हारी वजह से घर गृहस्थी चलती है, तुम तो देवी हो, तुम तो लक्ष्मी हो, तुम तो सरस्वती हो. और रियल लाइफ में क्या हालत है हम सब जानते हैं. In the workforce, they have atrophied to barely 8% of the total workforce.
Yes.
So this pravachan thing doesn't move me anymore. I've always been very hard-hearted and hard-headed.
Yes.
But now it makes me very angry.
Yes.
It really makes me angry to see a whole country being infantilized.
Well, I'm so happy you are using that word, infantilization of the country, because that was drawing me to my next and last question, which is, has this kind of media output, this kind of media complicity in the Hindi belt, and this kind of embedded tactics, has it completely conditioned the whole of the Hindi belt, do you think? Or do you still think that there is some possibility of a return to rational liberal values?
I think there are possibilities, not necessarily because the rationalists are more in number and irrational idiots are smaller in number. I think they're 50-50 at any given point in time. But the
Yes,
fact is that after the liftoff, there
yes,
will be a lot of economic, weakening of the country. And when people are really hungry out in the streets, looking for jobs, looking for a way of earning, there will be anger, there will be distrust. The labor which has been driven out of their little hovels and thrown out like animals from our mega cities,
yes,
they are going to come back. They are going because there is no placement for them. मेम
yes.
साहबों की पीठ टूट रही है झाड़ू लगाते लगाते, हाथ खराब हो रहे हैं उनके, लोशन भी ठीक नहीं हो रहा है,
Mm.
बाल हेयर ड्रेसर भी बंद है.
Yes,
So
yes,
the middle classes will want their old Johnnies back at service. The Johnnies will probably be very hurt, and a lot of them may prefer to stay on in the villages and start tilling the soil again.
Mm.
So I think there are lots of variables possible,
Mm.
uh, but I would still hope on the side of sanity. And I would still think that there are plenty of people in the Hindi belt who, not everybody in the Hindi belt lives in the Hindi belt anymore, myself included.
Yeah, yeah,
Not everybody in the Hindi belt is also speaking Hindi anymore or reading Hindi anymore.
yes,
So look for the Hindi belt walas in other media also. Uh, when I talk to my Hindi friends living in Mumbai or in Bangalore or even in Gujarat, they come out as extremely sane, sensitive people who are facing hard times but who are stubborn and who hold on to certain norms and certain values. So let's see how it happens, how it unfurls. I mean, I'm no Jyotishi, but I
yes,
do hope we grow up. I
yeah.
do
Yeah.
hope we grow up.
Mrinalji, also one last question. You did serve as head of the Prasar Bharati Corporation, and I was wondering what you made now of Prasar Bharati, especially the kind of lapdog role that Doordarshan and All India Radio have taken on in an even bigger way than ever in the past. Prasar Bharati has actually launched a news service of all things, and you can see a very different kind of media approach. At least that's what I seem to see from this distance. And it seems to be as if autonomy, which was the dream and hope of Prasar Bharati, has been completely thrown out of the window. Would you agree? And would you think that there's any hope left?
I would advise, frankly, let's be honest and make it again a department of the INB ministry like it
Yes.
used to be. That is when the best serials were made. That is when All India Radio introduced some of the best musicians, some of the best, thinkers to the
Yes.
nation. Some of the best Hindi writers worked for All India Radio in those days. It was when it was run as a department of the government of India, it was doing much better. Once it became a corporation, then like every PSU, it became a milch cow. But its misery was multiplied by the fact that to date, it does not have its own selection board. So the
Yes.
old people, when they were given a choice between joining this PSU or staying as government servants, chose to go with the government. All those people have now more or less retired. So they are working on practically daily wages. People put on short term contracts. So I wouldn't really blame them.
Mm.
It's they're like migrant labor.
Mm.
They are
Mm.
building great buildings, but
Yes.
somebody else is preparing a blueprint, somebody else is fetching and carrying. All
Mm.
that they look forward to is कि एक दिन ये काम खत्म हो जाएगा, फिर हम अपने गांव जा करके आराम से नीम के पेड़ के नीचे खटिया पर सोएंगे.
Right.
So within All India Radio and within Doordarshan, there may be still good people, but most of the people with institutional memory are now long since retired. They
Mm.
have a huge, untapped mine of old recordings of all kinds, which
Mm.
are slowly disintegrating because they have been collected, but nobody has yet gone about the tedious task of digitizing them, preserving them for the nation. They have huge buildings. After the railways, they are the biggest owners of land
I
in the
see.
country, because every major city, every major capital, state capital, has a huge All India Radio and Doordarshan campus. Their studios do only part-time work, and yet they are not allowed to rent it out because they are still deemed government property, because the assets have not been, even after 97, they have not been formally transferred from the government to the corporation. So actually the corporation or the board is not to be blamed, because they have never really been given the tools with which they could really have built. So I think it would be better to ask for euthanasia for Prasar Bharati and make it again into a department of the government of India, and start doing what they are doing. I mean, that is totally understandable कि government का भोंपू है तो government बजाएगी, तो government की सांस से वो चलेगा, तो
Yes.
ठीक है, वो बात ठीक है. लेकिन if you want to make it into a corporation, that's another whole new ball game, and I don't think they are really तबियतन हम लोग बहुत autonomous लोग नहीं. We
Yes.
hate autonomy, and particularly the ministries hate to part from power.
Yes.
But my advice would be, under the circumstances, be upfront. कहो ये हमारी चीज है, हम इसको वापस लेते हैं. जैसे सीता माता को धरती ने वापस ले लिया था, उसी तरह से आप प्रसार भारती को कीजिए और
Well, I'm
रेडियो और दूरदर्शन को वापस अपनी छाती से चिपकाइए. उसके बाद फिर आप जो करना चाहें कीजिए, आपको कोई नहीं रोकेगा.
Well, I'm so happy that you're so candid about this. So let me still stretch my luck and ask you one last question. Okay, you have been an industry doyen. You have worked across media. I want to ask you a two-part question, and this will be the last question. How have you seen the industry bodies like the Editors Guild or the Women's Press Corps or the Press Club of India? How have you seen them respond to these livelihood issues of journalists after coronavirus? One. And two, what would your advice be, Rinalji, to journalists whose jobs might be in danger? Especially, I'm not talking of prominent journalists. I'm talking of, let's say, a middle-aged woman sub-editor somewhere in Moradabad or somewhere. What would your advice be to people like that whose lives may be in danger or livelihood may be in danger?
You see, I frankly would advise them to immediately get a skill upgradation for themselves. Even if they have to pawn their mother's jewelry, they should go get enlisted, learn about the digital media as much as they can, because skilled hands in Hindi are going to be very, very few, really skilled hands. Secondly, those who are reporters must learn to write. They must really arm themselves with good writing skills, and also with good healthy dose of curiosity. And I would also advise the English language journalists, who are much better trained in most cases, come from more privileged backgrounds, to switch to the vernacular that they are comfortable in. Because the times that are coming, the media is going to belong to the vernaculars. English will be an interface that will be used. In any case, उसको फेसबुक वाले को या गूगल वाले को आपकी ज़रूरत नहीं है ट्रांसलेशन करने के लिए. उसके पास अपने ट्रांसलेशन के टूल्स होंगे, और अभी तो गंदे हैं लेकिन उनको ठीक कर लेंगे वो लोग. So translation is not going to be a problem. People want to know what India thinks and speaks in its multiple 21 other languages, and that is, I think, would be my advice to both the Hindi and the English journalists. अभी भी time है. Learn new skills, learn the vernacular of the area that you come from. Try to be bilingual, trilingual, जितनी भाषाओं में लिख सकते हो. I mean, अभी तक at my age, I'm still earning a living by my facility with various Indian languages and dialects.
Yes.
Because that's the way to go. I mean, there is no other way to go. And what was your second question again?
The question was really about how the industry bodies have dealt with this situation.
I think industry bodies, up to the 90s worked when there were professional editors, and when there were editors who had been through, in a way, the double struggle of the freedom fight, and also the emergency years. That generation is now gone. So I think the bodies are required. Bodies like Editors Guild, for example, or the Media Foundation. These are good bodies and they are required. Press Council, however, needs a reload. It needs to be peopled more with people within the media, not with representatives of media houses chosen by the owners,
Mm.
because that makes it weak, as
Yeah.
Paranjay Thakur's report on paid news shows. So I think the media bodies need really to be looked through a closed filter, and let them also, take a call on their own existence. Like
Mm.
I've been in Prasar Bharati for 5 years. I personally feel the government should take it back and make
Yes.
it department. So
Yes.
people who are members of these media bodies should also really do a stern depth sounding and stern and honest to goodness depth sounding and see whether they are relevant or not. If they are not relevant, क्यों अपनी जगह घसाई कराते हो, क्यों जूते खाते हो, जाओ भागो, कुछ और अच्छा काम करो, कुछ नहीं होता फूल लगाओ, गोभी उगाओ, कुछ करो, क्या पड़ी है तुमको कि तुम प्याज भी खाओ और जूते भी खाओ. People are laughing at you, and at the same time the government is hitting you on the head with a danda and forcing you to, say things that you probably would not say in your saner moments. So I think everybody needs to be connected with the media, and there are very good people in both the Editors Guild and the Press Council. There are some very good people. I think
Yes.
they need to really put their heads together and be honest for once in their life. अब क्या
Yes.
रह गया है यार, कभी भी हम में से कोई खलासों के ऊपर जा सकता है. अब क्या रह
Yes.
गया इतना सोचने के लिए? Be
Yes.
honest for once in your life.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you will never be able to look yourself in the face.
Well, Mrinal Pandeji, that was absolutely fantastic and candid. And I really thank you very much for joining me on this episode of JPod, this podcast on journalism at the time of coronavirus. And I thank you very much on behalf of
Thank you.
everybody for sparing your
Thanks.
time and your expertise. Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Thank you.